September 15th, 1985, Plymouth, Massachusetts. The birthplace of New England was shrouded in darkness. A cool pre-fall chill hung in the night air, with the temperature dropping to 40 degrees. Silence permeated the Plymouth County Correctional Facility. But in one corner of the building, a flurry of clandestine activity was taking place. A series of bed sheets tied together was slowly lowered from a window. One by one, 5 men emerged from the window, silently sliding down to ground level, 20 feet below. The men disappeared into the night. By daybreak over the American East Coast, an international political saga had commenced. Charles Taylor was born in Arlington, Liberia, January 28, 1948. His father was a middle-class Americo-Liberian, having once worked as a sharecropper but eventually becoming a lawyer and judge. His mother, Yasa Zoe, anglicized to Louise Taylor, was a member of the Gola ethnicity, one of the non-settler indigenous groups widely present in the country. This would place young Charles in an interesting position, with a connection to the long-ruling Americo-Liberians, but also with indigenous roots. That said, the mixed marriage was socially unusual and had come about hastily after his mother's pregnancy. Thus, his father's family placed Charles with a family friend to be raised from the age of 8 months. Martha Cisco would raise Charles from that point onward, and he would later speak of her as a de facto mother figure. Despite the connections of both his father's family and the Ciscos, this was far from growing up in luxury. There was no electricity and no running water, with some of the rooms made of mud bricks. Clean drinking water was also a scarcity. Charles began attending school at age 7. The house was in Millsburg, but the school was back in Arlington, necessitating a 45-minute walk each way every day. According to Charles, he didn't have shoes to wear until 2 years later. Despite the challenges, Charles was known to be extremely ambitious, and eventually his hard work and family connections paid off. At the age of 13, Charles Taylor was granted a spot at the prestigious Ricks Institute, a Baptist school in Monrovia founded by foreign missionaries. Taylor was granted a scholarship to the school by a Lebanese-owned business group. Taylor proved to be a hard worker, but a major troublemaker. After incidents involving mooning teachers and relieving himself in the school's well water, Taylor was expelled. A former teacher would later say, quote, "He was reckless and arrogant." Subsequently, Taylor nonetheless managed to get himself selected as part of the government-backed teacher training program run by the Kakata Rural Teachers Training Institute. This time, Taylor managed to stick with the program, qualifying for his first teaching job at the age of 19. He was employed as a math and science teacher at the Charles E. Dewey Junior High School, located in Bomi County. This is a mainly rural, rainforest-covered area to the northwest of Monrovia, featuring scattered towns as well as several satellite plantations of Firestone's rubber facilities. Within a year, he was hired to teach back at his old school in Arlington, to which he'd made that 45-minute walk each day as a child. His next opportunity came in the nation's capital, as he was given an opportunity to teach in Monrovia. In 1971, when Taylor was 23 years old, longtime President William Tubman passed away. The party of the Americo-Liberian elites, the True Whig Party, had been the only effective political party in the country for about 100 years. Thus, Tubman's hand-picked successor, William Tolbert, became president of Liberia July 23, 1971. The new president launched an open recruitment initiative, with the general public allowed to take an exam designed to identify the country's best and brightest. Taylor performed well and was offered a job as a junior accountant in the Ministry of Finance. Taylor's professional advancement would be jarred further into high gear by a quite personal incident. A friend he'd known at the Ricks Institute returned to Liberia, having gone overseas to study and received a master's degree from an American university. With his newfound prestige, the friend began dating Taylor's girlfriend, who subsequently left him. This convinced Taylor that to get anywhere, he too needed an American education sooner than later. Thus, the following year, Taylor was on his way to Boston. He enrolled successfully at Chamberlain Junior College. 2 years later, he began studying for an economic degree at nearby Bentley College. Taylor graduated in 1977, successfully receiving his degree. While there, he had joined and risen through the ranks of the Union of Liberian Associations in the Americas, a confederation of Liberian interest groups in the United States. The ULAA was primarily composed of indigenous Liberians. Taylor, being half Americo-Liberian, was one of the few members with Americo-Liberian heritage in the group. He therefore played up his indigenous heritage to foster credibility. Taylor eventually became chairman of the ULAA following his graduation. 2 years later, Taylor and the ULAA were in New York. Taylor's old boss, President Tolbert, had flown into town. He was there for the United Nations General Assembly before a planned trip to Washington to meet with President Carter. Since Taylor had left President Tolbert's administration 7 years earlier and come to the United States, everything had changed. The indigenous Liberians, represented in the United States by the ULAA, were growing increasingly frustrated with the long-time rule of the Americo-Liberians and the True Whig Party. Tolbert himself was viewed as corrupt and emblematic of the system. That was despite his conciliatory efforts over the years, including his attempts to open up the bureaucracy to the most talented candidates across the country, regardless of ethnic background, the campaign that originally resulted in Taylor's hire by the government a decade earlier. Now he was at the head of the opposition abroad. Taylor led a protest against Tolbert outside the Liberian mission to the United Nations. President Tolbert attempted to engage Taylor in spirited debate. However, this largely backfired as Taylor gained a newfound credibility. Suddenly, he was known amongst the government's opponents, both domestically and internationally, as the man who called out the president face to face. Several months earlier, during the rice riots back in Liberia, which involved large-scale domestic opposition, Taylor proposed that the ULAA help the opposition by seizing Liberian diplomatic facilities in the United States. Although he later backed off of that plan, Taylor was now seen around the world as one of the foremost figures opposing the Liberian government. In February of the next year, President Tolbert realized that he needed to take action or the situation was going to get out of control. He invited the domestic opposition to officially register as a political party. Meanwhile, he invited Taylor and members of the ULAA to return to Liberia and also join the government. Thus, Taylor left America and for the second time joined the administration of President Tolbert, now as a much more prominent figure. Once again, however, it wasn't long before they were on opposite sides, this time in the most dramatic of ways. On April 12th, Master Sergeant Samuel Doe, a member of the indigenous Kron ethnic group and a frequent critic of Tolbert's, led a military coup against the president. A supporting role was played by Major Thomas Kwankpa. The conspirators arranged a brutal public humiliation and execution of Tolbert and his cabinet ministers, establishing a mainly indigenous-comprised military junta, the People's Redemption Council. Taylor, who had of course established his current credibility with anti-Tolbert groups by playing up his indigenous heritage, sided with the coup plotters. He was by this point also married to Major Kwankpa's niece. With these connections, Taylor was named the head of the General Services Agency for the new military government. This put him in charge of procuring all of Liberia's government contracts. Taylor would use this position to amass an illicit fortune, while also cultivating a network of sympathetic contacts across the country and the armed forces. This provided Taylor with the capital and the support he would need in his future endeavors. However, Taylor's corruption was too blatant even for the military regime which he served. In May 1983, he was removed as the head of the General Services Agency, being demoted to Deputy Minister of Commerce. In November, he was officially accused of corruption, being charged with embezzling $1 million American from the General Services Agency. Understanding that he was now on the wrong side of the brutal military regime, Taylor fled to America once again. He took refuge with some of his old contacts in the Boston area. However, he was tracked down by the U.S. Marshals Service and arrested on May 21st. They were acting upon an extradition request from Liberia. Despite the fact that the military regime of Samuel Doe had overthrown the Americo-Liberians, Doe had gone out of his way to maintain Liberia's American alliance. Earlier the same year, he'd cut diplomatic ties with the Soviet Union. Taylor was held at the Plymouth County Correctional Facility. He made the case that these were politically motivated charges. This was refuted by Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard Stearns, saying there appeared to be sufficient evidence to bring charges and that regardless of the nature of the Liberian regime, these particular charges did not appear political. Now cornered, Taylor plotted his escape. On September 15, 1985, Taylor and his 4 co-conspirators slipped through the broken window bars, slid down the bedsheet, and emerged onto the silent grounds. After their MacGyver-style escape from the prison itself, the group scaled a perimeter wall and then made their way to a rendezvous point at nearby Jordan Hospital. Taylor's wife and sister-in-law were there waiting with a getaway car. The group drove through the night all the way to Staten Island. From there, Taylor disappeared. What actually happened that night has long been a matter of speculation. He turned up in West Africa recruiting guerrilla fighters at some point between November of 1985 and April of '86. Taylor himself later asserted that he was assisted in his escape by the Central Intelligence Agency, and it's also been reported that he was working with the Defense Intelligence Agency in an undisclosed capacity at some point in the 1980s. Whether that was only during his tenure as the head of Liberia's General Services Agency prior to his arrest, or whether it continued afterward, is unknown. By the time of the escape, America was beginning to sour on Doe's military regime, so the idea of clandestinely using Taylor as a counterweight isn't so far-fetched. However, the idea of American intelligence involvement is tempered by the fact that upon his return to Africa, Taylor took his recruits to Libya to train under the regime of Muammar Gaddafi, who at the time was involved in an undeclared war against the United States, with several battles between Libyan and American military assets during the late 1980s, along with Gaddafi-backed civilian attacks such as the Lockerbie bombing. That leads credence to the idea that it could have been Libyan intelligence or that of their allies such as the Cubans or the Soviets. Another possibility is the involvement of intelligence agencies from neighboring countries, in particular the Ivory Coast, a major opponent of the Doe regime. Taylor and his rebels would later begin their campaign in Liberia by crossing the border from the Ivory Coast, by which time nearby Burkina Faso was also providing support. While the details of how he got there remain elusive, Taylor's next actions began the process of turning him into one of the world's most infamous figures. The rebellion he launched in 1989 commenced a 15-year period of nearly constant violence across both Liberia and fellow ex-freedmen's colony Sierra Leone. Taylor was right in the middle of the depravity, gaining a reputation as one of the world's most violent warlords. During an interregnum in the fighting, Taylor ran for president of Liberia on the now ignominious slogan, "He killed my ma, he killed my pa, but I will still vote for him." In elections generally deemed free and fair, Taylor was victorious, largely owing to the population's belief that he would restart the war if he lost. Eventually, Taylor was forced from office due to international pressure and charged with war crimes. He was convicted in 2013 and is currently serving out his sentence in a British prison. The 50-year sentence will essentially see Taylor spend the rest of his life in jail. However, it was his break out of prison nearly 30 years earlier that set the stage for all that was to come. The details of that mysterious night remain unclear to this day, but its role as a catalyst for the years of violence that followed quickly became apparent. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button and leave a comment. For more content like this, be sure to check out our channel page and hit the bell so that you know when the next video is posted. Be sure to check out the project that forms the basis for all these videos at apoliticalworldmap.org. And if you can, please join us on Patreon so we can keep the videos coming. Thanks again for watching. I'm Alex. I am out.